From the Chesapeake Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental reporting, this is Chesapeake Uncharted, the podcast that uncovers stories about the Bay, its interconnected ecosystem, and the people who rely on them. I'm Jeremy Cox. On today's episode, it seems like the through line in your research is ugly fish, if I had to guess.
Ugly fish, I find offensive to the fish. Where they're not ugly, it's just they're really cool in their own ways. We just gotta learn to appreciate them.
It's a good thing for me that this episode's guest can take some lighthearted ribbing. Still, it's pretty clear that I'd wandered into sensitive territory. You see, Noah Bressman is a fish scientist as well as an avid fisherman. And as you'll hear, his relationship with our scaly friends goes so much deeper than that. He literally wears his passion for fish on his sleeve. On the day I met him, at his office in Salisbury, Maryland, he was wearing this Tommy Bahama-type shirt just covered with drawings of different kinds of fish.
Counting up how many fish and fish-y-ish clothes I have, and doing a count up on social media, and I'm at 56 right now. Okay. And this shirt specifically, this was a red, white, and blue shirt with assorted different fish species, some crabs. We got, I think, some shrimp and lobsters on here, and I got some subtly fish shorts to go with it as well.
Clothes are one form of expression. Bressman has another that's a tad more permanent. A tattoo extends down the full length of his right arm. It shows a dragon-like fish with pointy teeth in full pursuit of a school of smaller green and yellow fish. The predator is a snakehead, an invasive species from Asia whose population has exploded in Chesapeake Bay waters in recent years. The prey are mummichugs, a minnow-like native fish. The whole scene is larger than life. The aptly named snakehead is positively menacing. Just don't call it ugly, because if you do, it could have real-world consequences, Bressman tells me.
It looks kind of like the head of a python or anaconda with the same reticulated pattern on there. And so people are like, oh, it looks gross, it's got a gross name. But the big problem with these fish is there's so many of them, they're not native to here, and our best solution is eating them. And so calling them ugly fish deters people from wanting to eat them.
Welcome to Season 3 of Chesapeake Uncharted. This time, our team here at the Bay Journal is interested in hearing from a younger generation of Bay leaders, the people who weren't born when the Chesapeake Bay cleanup formally began 40 years ago. With the Bay restoration effort facing its current set of cleanup goals in 2025, this felt like a good time to go searching for some inspiration. Each episode spotlights one of these wave makers. Today, our guest is Noah Bressman. He joined the faculty at Salisbury University in 2021 and has quickly made a name for himself as a marine biology researcher, as well as a science communicator. He's active on social media. You can often find him manning informational booths at local festivals. He organizes fishing tournaments that incorporate environmental education, and he spreads his ecological message by creating art, producing hyper-colorful images of marine life that are both dramatic and illuminating. More about Noah Bressman after this quick break.
Hi, this is Laura Lutz, editor at the Chesapeake Bay Journal. I hope you're enjoying our podcast, and I'd like to invite you to join the community of Bay Journal readers. If you care about climate change, wildlife, clean air, healthy communities, and of course the Bay and its rivers, you'll find news you can use at the Bay Journal, along with some great ideas for outdoor travel. Our subscriptions are free. Check us out at bayjournal.com and click on subscribe to start receiving the best independent environmental news in the Bay region.
Hello again. On today's episode of Chesapeake Uncharted, we're listening to my interview with Noah Bressman. I suppose you could call him a fish whisperer, but Bressman is perhaps too garrulous for that to fit. Since we live in the same town and teach at the same university, he and I tend to bump into each other socially. We first met a few years ago at the university's faculty golf scramble. We got paired onto the same team. Neither of us play very much, but Bressman is one of those aggravating players who can just pick up his clubs and play really well, whereas I get my money's worth hacking around the golf course, which gave me plenty of time to tease out his life story that day. Fast forward to the day I recorded this story. We met at his lab, which accounts for the little echo you might hear in our voices. We mostly talked about the status of invasive fish in the Chesapeake ecosystem. Exotic species like blue catfish and snakeheads are upending marine communities on both sides of the bay. But Bressman hopes that through research and careful marketing efforts, society can transform a negative into a positive. Off we go. Well, folks can probably tell there's a little bit of an echo in here. We have very hard floors, very hard walls. This is your space. What do you do in here?
So this is one of my spaces. This is my space at the Ronald Center for Entrepreneurship, where I'm the scientist in residence, where I help bring science and scientific ideas to this collaboration of ideas for the sake of entrepreneurship. But this is where I do some things related to science communication, where it's my hub for science communication, where I get all my materials here. Third Friday is just 100 feet out there, so I can just bring my stuff out into the street and yell fish at people, and hopefully they want to listen to what I have to say about invasive species, local ecosystems.
How did you end up here?
I was doing a postdoc in California, working at Chapman University on a Navy grant for a project investigating the ability to use hagfish slime or hagfish slime related or based products to safely, sustainably, and reversibly stop small boat propellers at high speeds. So basically making a slime weapon for the Navy, but I'm not really allowed to talk about that much. But I was doing some side projects on other hagfish slime, right? Just kind of studying the general properties of it. And postdoc is a temporary position. Postdoctoral research fellowship is just like, you're not a student anymore. I finished my PhD, but I'm not yet a professor. I'm getting skills on how to run a lab, how to be in charge and lead a team, things like that. Mm-hmm. And so I was applying around, as one does. I was like, yep, it's the pandemic. There's probably not many positions available. And I see Salisbury University. It's in Maryland, where my fiance's from. So I was like, oh, she's like, great, we can come back to Maryland, where she loved the state, and she has a bunch of family here. My family's in the New York tri-state area. So I was like, it's not that far from them. But then I realized, I was like, oh, there's a lot of snakeheads in that area. And so snakeheads are a species that I did one of my chapters of my PhD dissertation on, trying to figure out if they separate fact from fiction. Like, can they actually go on land and move around on land? And if so, how well do they do it? I pretty much found that they can go on land sometimes if the water conditions are really poor, like if it's too salty or too much dissolved carbon dioxide in the water, and so then they may leave the water. And they can move pretty well over land, but pretty well for a fish, so you don't have to worry about them chasing down your puppies and babies, come out on land, snatching them up and pull them in the water. Well, nothing like that.
That's a relief.
Yeah.
Well, let's start from the start. How did you become such a fishing fanatic in the first place?
I was born, and I just really loved fish. There is no explanation.
Memory of.
One of my earliest memories related to like hardcore fish passion was I did my second grade book report on the Audubon's Field Guide to Fish, while everybody else was doing like Captain Underpants or Harry Potter or whatnot. I went up in front of the class, had a field guide to fish, and for those who aren't familiar with field guides, it's not a story. It's just images of fish with a short description and a range where you can get them. So I just went up and showed pictures of fish and said a couple facts about them and why I liked each of the fish that I chose.
I bet you were a hit.
Oh yeah, I was always known for being the fish guy.
Well, so we're talking about snakeheads now. Let's drill down on that. How did they get here?
Snakeheads got here in the early 2000s, originally from Eastern Asia, like China, up to the Korean Peninsula, and they are really tasty. And so they were brought in for the live fish trade in TC, particularly in live fish markets where people like to keep fish extra fresh. And if a fish can breathe air and survive in a bucket of no water for a day, it's a good candidate to keep fresh in a live fish market. Also, when they're really small, they are bright orange and colorful, and so people like some snakeheads as pets. And so it seems like there's a combination of people, their pet grows too big, they release them. But also there was a case where I think it was the case in Crofton, Maryland, where the first snakeheads were found, where a person got two snakeheads from a local fish market, and he from his culture, he was going to make a medicinal stew for his sick sister. But then the sister started recovering, and so to kind of get good luck, he did a ritual release of these species where he released them back in the wild, trying to like, we're not going to eat you, we're going to let you be free. But unfortunately, it's not the ecosystem they were moved from, and so now they're non-native, introduced, and could start reproducing. And so it's a mix of those two factors, introducing them around, and then people also really like catching them because they fight hard and they taste good. And so some people would intentionally and illegally spread them around to other areas, which is how they're part of how their population spreads so quickly, perhaps with some overland movements particularly during flooding events. And so there they quickly spread throughout most of the eastern shore and western shore, up to Pennsylvania and Delaware, even Virginia, D.C. We've even seen them in Georgia and Arkansas, so they've kind of jumped around a little bit.
What has made them so successful?
It's the combination of their traits that make them be able to survive pretty much in any condition. Like, hey, if you could breathe air and move on land and survive under the ice and in blistering hot temperatures, with no oxygen in the water, you could probably survive in any water you're put into.
Has this had implications for the ecosystem, the aquatic ecosystem in this region?
Yes. I'll give yes with an asterisk because they're still relatively new here. The only first ones are described 20 years ago, and since then they spread, and their population is still establishing further. They kind of haven't reached the climax of their role in the ecosystem yet. And so we still don't know fully about them. We've done some preliminary data where, like, the first snakehead we cut open in a diet study where we were just starting happened to have a threatened, had alewife, one of the threatened river herring species in there. Mm-hmm. First time ever described a snakehead having that in their stomach, and it immediately shows, well, they are consuming species of concern. At least one individual. How many individuals of these populations, that's something to figure out. But they definitely have some aspect of negative impact in the ecosystem because they have to eat native species around here.
But you don't just study these fish, you are actively involved in trying to limit their numbers. I wonder if you could talk about what you've done to sponsor fishing tournaments and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. So my lab has hosted for the second year in a row, a Nanticoke River Invasive Fishing Derby out of Cherry Beach Park in Sharptown, where we have primarily focused in an effort on blue catfish. Because the reason we're primarily doing that is, for example, in this last tournament, about almost 1,000 pounds of fish were caught, with I think almost 800 catfish were caught, and only 3 snakeheads were caught. So you can see how, just by the numbers, the blue catfish seem to be outweighing snakeheads over 100 to 1. And so my lab is particularly focusing on removal efforts of blue catfish. Snakeheads get roped into that, but we might as well just encourage removal of all invasive species. But by numbers, blue catfish seem to be that larger problem, particularly because they'll eat anything and everything they get in their way. And they make up so much biomass in the river, where they're making up in some tributaries 70% of the fish biomass. So,
wow. Well, so let's drill down on that one.
Mm-hmm.
What are blue catfish? Where'd they come from?
So blue catfish are, like largemouth bass, native to the Mississippi and Ohio River basins, Missouri rivers. And they were introduced in the 70s in the western shore, in the Virginia side, intentionally, back when the bay was pretty much dead, not much living in there, super polluted. And fisheries managers in Virginia were like, well, we got these fish that down south that get to almost 150 pounds. They taste good, they fight hard, and they can survive a lot of conditions. Let's put them in the rivers there so people have things to catch. But they thought that the salinity of the bay would prevent them, because they're freshwater fish that probably didn't like the saltiness, without doing any experiments or due diligence,
Right.
and put them in there. Then it turns out they could spread out of those rivers, and then went up and around the bay and got to the eastern shore about 20 years ago. And since then, they've kind of spread to all major tributaries in the Chesapeake Bay watershed.
Right, because the bay is an estuary, sometimes it's more fresh than it is salty. It would get fresh enough then for these blue cats to travel great distances?
Yeah, so mostly they went up and around, kind of staying by those river mouths, but let's say a big storm comes through, washed a lot of fresh water down into the bay, they could spread more there. A lot of the catfish have a lot of food to grow and reproduce very quickly, which is a little different than in, let's say, the native Mississippi, where they may have alligators and Cajun people feeding on them, keeping their population down. So their population kind of grew out of check, and they're eating anything and everything they can get their mouths around. And so with our invasive species tournament, we're encouraging people to actively target and remove invasive species, teaching them about their effects on the ecosystem, like all these things that I mentioned, and how our best solution is to be their predators.
Do these fishing tournaments also feed into the science that you're doing?
Yes. And so the main reason, part of the reason we're doing this tournament is my lab can only catch so many fish at a time. But what if we get hundreds of people?
Despite your best efforts.
Despite my best efforts. I mean, some days we could do pretty well, but then we'll have to do a lot of work, a lot of effort. It's too much effort for me. So how about we get the whole community together to go fishing at once and bring all the fish to us in one central location while we're doing this, where we then have a team of scientists ready to cut the catfish open, see what's in their stomach, see what they're eating, take tissue samples for DNA and stable isotopes and all sorts of fancy scientific analyses, remove any ovaries that are filled with eggs so we can count their eggs and figure out their reproductive rate, take some other measurements on their head shapes and things like that to figure out how quickly they can get to a size where they can eat crabs, check for signs of diseases that they may be transmitting to other fishes in the ecosystem. And so it's a great way for also increased science transparency, where there's been a lot of distrust built up in science lately, and I'm trying to help fight that.
We're talking about stomach contents. I'm hungry to hear more. What have you found? You've been, with your graduate student, working on electrofishing and collecting blue cats on the Nanticoke River and its tributary, the Marshy Hope. Like you said, there's big questions about whether they are depressing the populations of crabs and rockfish and other species that are, either threatened or commercially important. And what did you all find there, or what have you found?
So we found that their diet is a little bit seasonal. They'll eat whatever is most abundant the time of year. So like in the spring when you have those river herring, like alewives and blueback herring coming to spawn up the rivers.
Right, the fabled runs of the herring, right?
Exactly. When they come up, they take advantage of that. They eat those. In the summer when crabs are out and about, they eat a lot more of those. And so they'll eat whatever is most abundant in the area. But we kind of learned that they're opportunistic, omnivorous generalists. Opportunistic meaning they'll take whatever is most convenient to them at that time, whereas omnivorous means they'll be eating plants and animals, and generalist means that they have a wide diet range. So they're basically anything and everything that comes by their mouths, but they're not passive scavengers, just eating dead things. They're not bottom feeders like people make them out to be. They are active predators, eating things like primarily those river herring, crabs, white perch. We've seen some sunfishes in there, striped bass in their stomachs too, turtles, even a big one that made the news was we found an adult wood duck in the stomach of a 47-pound catfish.
How does that even happen?
Little duck, you just paddle around on top of a log, minding its own business. Catfish is underneath, and perhaps Jaws styles comes up and snatches it out. We didn't see any signs of birdshot, like it was like a duck that maybe got lost after it was shot. So it seemed like it actively preyed upon this. And since we posted that, we had other reports of people sending us, I found 3 ducks in this catfish stomach. I found a bunch of ducklings. Somebody found a tern in the stomach of a catfish.
Was this known before that they were, getting into the avian world?
Maybe a little bit, but it wasn't really public knowledge and wasn't really fully documented scientific knowledge.
Law, yeah.
There's anecdotal evidence that's never quite corroborated, and this is clear evidence. And ironically, it was the first catfish we cut open into the study of thousands of catfish. the ecosystem of the Chesapeake Bay, I think these catfish pose an existential threat to the ecosystem as we know to the Chesapeake Bay and the livelihoods of the Chesapeake Bay. Like, think of what is Maryland without crabs and crabbers and going to a restaurant to buy crabs. And so people, like, the more people catch and remove these catfish, the more crabs and things like that we'll still have. And that's kind of the best solution we got right now. But we're also encouraging commercial fisheries on a large scale to remove them, where they can remove in larger numbers and then get them on menus. So if you don't like fishing yourself, encourage your local restaurants to support restaurants that are selling blue catfish and snake on the menu.
Yeah, why do you have to do that? You said it's easy to catch. You said they're delicious. Why don't we see it more often then?
It's a cultural shift. That's getting back to, ew, it looks gross. Or catfish thought as a bottom feeder, and bottom feeders are thought to be like muddy and gross. But they're eating ducks on the surface, and they're eating river herring, which are notoriously kind of fast-swimming fish. They are not bottom feeders. They're active predators.
It's a perception issue, but it's also a regulatory issue, right? They're trying to make it easier for fishermen, anglers to bring them to market.
Yes.
I'm wondering if that's something that you support.
Yes, I support that. I've been working with local legislators, both local, regional, state, federal legislators, senators, congressmen, governors, talking to them all about this.
Because the obstacles, right? Normally fish have to go through a certain process, right, to make it to your table, and you have to be a certain size of a processing facility. Yeah,
there's two processes that complicate it. So all fish has to go through Food and FDA administration, because it's Food and Drug Administration makes sense to make sure it's safe as food. All seafood that comes in from Chesapeake Bay, from striped bass to blue crabs, goes through that process. However, blue catfish also have to go under a USDA inspection. USDA being agricultural products, but the wild-caught catfish in Chesapeake Bay are not agricultural products, which just doesn't make any sense. The issue with that is there's a big catfish lobby in the Deep South where they have catfish farms, and they don't want competition in the market from wild-caught Chesapeake Bay catfish. Now, nothing against catfish farms. They're a very sustainable source of seafood and the protein, and it's done in a very sustainable way, and kudos to them for doing that. But capitalism, free market, if this more catfish comes on the market, that devalues their product. Or perhaps if this product comes on cheaper, it's harder for them to sell it. And so they have lobbied to get increased regulation where, you know what, ours is an agricultural product because we farm them, so we have to get USDA inspection anyway. So all catfish have to get USDA inspection, even though the wild-caught Chesapeake Bay catfish isn't farmed. Yeah.
So where does this stand right now?
So I've been talking with legislators for the new agricultural bill that's coming in to try to remove that language for the USDA.
The Farm Bill?
The Farm Bill, yes, the Farm Bill.
That's a huge bill.
It's a big bill. I was working directly with the appropriations chair and the other members of some of the other committees that are working on the Farm Bill for Congress, and hopefully we get this language in there.
So I can't help but notice, because I'm right over your shoulder, is some examples of your artwork, and that looks like a very toothy fish. Is that a piranha? Right over your shoulder, yeah.
No, so that is a bluegill sunfish.
Really?
So it looks like a piranha. I do have a piranha somewhere. That's a piranha, that rainbowy one on the bottom left, second from the left. Well, piranha family, it's a silver dollar fish. This is a bluegill sunfish. So this technique I use is called clearing and staining. And you can, basically, it's a technique I use for studying functional morphology of fish, where functional morphology being the anatomy and how an organism uses anatomy, where if I just want to study the skeleton, there's a lot of meat and stuff in the way of the skeleton. But if I treat it with a series of chemicals, that stain certain tissues certain colors, like bone gets stained red and cartilage gets stained blue. And then if I dissolve everything else away that I don't care about, there's a skeleton nicely highlighted in really bright colors. And so sometimes I was like, whoa, that's a cool image. I could study the anatomy really well with that, but it's also just a beautiful image in and of itself. And so sometimes then I also Photoshop it to do these additional effects to change the colors around or present multiple fishes to kind of help tell a story and things like that. And it highlights details that people may not notice. So sure, this is a bluegill sunfish, but it's blown up to like 3 feet long almost, and you can see those tiny little teeth that they normally have, look a lot bigger, and I'm trying to just present fish in a different way, particularly focusing on local fish species, trying to highlight local diversity. And so I am doing this for fun a little bit, for educational purposes, and make a few bucks on the side selling the artwork online.
I was going to say, this is more than just a hobby. You get a little bit of fun money in addition. Exactly.
A little bit. It's not my main source of income. I'm a professor. I'm going to stick to my day job.
This is probably like picking your favorite child if you had children. But what's your favorite fish fact?
Okay, my favorite fish fact. Okay, that's a new one. I need to think about that a second. I thought you were going with favorite fish. Favorite fish fact.
No, that sounds better.
Yeah. No, I was like that's
fish fact. I think
Let me think on this for a second, because there's so many cool fish facts. Here's a fun fish fact that I taught to my fish biology students a couple of days ago in lecture. The fish called oyster toadfish is a local species here that makes ugly little fish that people think they are, but I think they're beautiful. They're really cool looking, and they have really cool biology. Where they have these sonic muscles, where it's these muscles attached to their gas bladder that they can contract super quickly to basically drum on their swim bladder to make loud sounds. And these sounds can be so loud that you can hear them from the surface sometimes on boats during their mating season, where they're trying to put on their loudest display. And the males try to attract the females by being as loud as they possibly can.
What does it sound like?
It just sounds like a foghorn sometimes.
Really?
So just like, just like that. But my favorite part of this...
Like really loud? As loud as a foghorn?
Depending on how close you put your ear to foghorn, but it's like pretty dang loud. Where if you were to put your ear right next to them underwater, it could be painfully loud. And so the craziest part about this is the females will go right up in front of the male, right next to them, and they'll be like, okay, blast away at that sound. Blow up my eardrums. Okay, fish don't actually have eardrums, but it's just the females go and just want to get overwhelmed by the sound. And I'm like, that sounds painful. Like, imagine, if I were to go on a date with somebody and just scream as loud as I possibly can in the ear, and they're like, nah, you're not loud enough. I'm going to go to the next male and find a different mate. I think that's just a really fun fish fact.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I'll wind up with maybe a philosophical question. We think about this a lot, and we're especially thinking about this a lot as 2025 approaches, which is the deadline for the various jurisdictions around the bay to put in place the actions to clean up the bay under the 2010 cleanup plan. What does a restored bay mean to you? What do you think it should look like?
Mm-hmm. So a restored bay is never going to look like what it looked like to John Smith. It's never going to get back to the pre-industrial era. We've changed it so much through dams, hydrology. Some of it's natural too. They tried to recreate the rivers that John Smith went up to and found that some of them sedimented in so much that he wouldn't have been able to travel nowadays through some of those portions with the boat he had, things like that. And so some of it is just natural sediment moves and changes. But the climate's changing. We are having changing weather patterns. The bay is warming up. We're getting species that we haven't regularly had in the bay for a while. Like the cutlass fish used to be rare to the bay, and now within the last few years, everybody gets them all the time in the bay. The warmer the weather is causing increased mortality to striped bass populations, reducing the populations. And so the climate is changing in a way that, even if we were to clean up the bay, it wouldn't 100% restore on its own. But where I see the goal for restoration of the bay is doing the best we can in making improvements. Big one is increasing oyster coverage, oyster reefs. And a lot of that is putting a lot more hard surfaces. A lot of the hard surface used to be just dredged out, make canals and things like that, or all the oysters were removed and the oyster beds died. But even with the restoration efforts we've had, people think, the oysters are so much more bountiful now. No, we're still at 1% of their historical levels. So for oysters, a single oyster can filter 50 gallons of water per day, cleaning the bay. So we got to restore all that oyster reefs to first get that biological filter in the bay.
That seems like a good place to end it.
Mm-hmm.
That was incredible. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Chesapeake Uncharted is brought to you by the Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental news in the Chesapeake region. Production for this episode was by me, Jeremy Cox. The story was edited by Laura Lutz. Our marketing and advertising director is Jackie Kane. You can find more episodes of Chesapeake Uncharted on your favorite streaming service or at ChesapeakeUncharted.com. If you like what you're hearing, sign up for a free Bay Journal news subscription at BayJournal.com. Until next time, this has been Jeremy Cox. Take care.